And so I called it the philosophy of me. And me, I created me. I put me in charge of me. I love me and I support me, and I won't do anything that will harm me. So I'm me. I heard this voice in my head. It said, "You're not alone. You're not me. I am." And he says, "I have chosen you to be one of my children." And I got so angry. I was furious. Where was he when I was suffering? And I'm asking you, because today is the day of salvation, to accept my son into your life. But if you choose no, I want to let you know I will never ask you again. And I said, "What do I do? I have no idea what to do." And he says, "That's all right. I do." My name is Evan, and I was born in Mobile, Alabama. I presently live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I found out a while back that my name in Irish means young warrior, and that applies to my life before I met the Lord, and it still applies today, but it's changed. It was earthly in the way it was, but now it's spiritual. My father was a heavy drinker. He spent more time away from home than he did at home. He was a very angry man throughout his whole life. It was hard to be around him towards the end because of his anger issues with his second wife. He really was not very kind to her. When I was conceived, my father came home in a drunken state. My big sister related this to me, and he beat her severely, and he raped her, and I was the byproduct of that. And my sister said that she would walk around running into cabinets and falling down and beating on her abdomen while I was inside her womb because she wanted to have an abortion. She didn't want me. And after I was born, I suffered neglect. She would leave me in my crib in my dirty diapers for hours and hours and hours. When I was able to start walking, she would keep me locked up so that she could keep an eye on me because I was a hyperactive kid. My sister told me that by the age of 5, she could see a serious death wish in me, that I had given up on living. My mother had taken to beating me with a leather belt, and if she was in an especially bad mood, she would beat me with a buckle end. At age 5, I ran away, or tried to run away for the first time. And my mother caught me, and she beat me all the way down the street in front of all my neighbors. And that really put a big dent in my dignity and my will to survive. At one point, I was confined to my room, mostly in my bed, for 3 months during the summer. When all the other kids were out playing, I was confined to my room. And she came in and caught me playing with toys, and so she took anything out of the room that could give me anything to do and made me stay in my bed. And I was on the bottom bunk, and so the only thing I had was my underwear, so I would take it off and put it on and use it as a pilot's cap. So at least I had something to play with. We moved to Louisiana when I was 9 years old. And the first time that I actually saw God at work in my life was, we were in a major migratory track for birds flying back and forth. And one day I was at the schoolyard riding around on my bike, and a whole flock of birds landed on the playground. And it was a big playground, and they completely covered it. And so I took up a rock and threw it at them, and they flew away, but they came back. And so I decided to do it again. And when I did it this time, they started to fly away, but then they turned and they came right at me. And if I hadn't have dropped to the ground, so that I was like, whoa. Now, I thought to myself, that has to be the hand of God. But still, I was living a very afraid and a very angry life because I never knew when my mom was going to blow up at me. One time, after we'd moved to Louisiana, my sister and I were watching wrestling on TV. And she was about 1.5 years younger than me. Well, actually 2.5 years younger than me. And we were playing wrestling, and I rolled over her and I accidentally elbowed her in the cheek right up underneath her eye. And so she got a black eye from it. And when she came to the table, she was wearing a pair of sunglasses, which was not allowed. My mother made her take them off. And when she asked why she had a black eye, she said, well, Evan and I, that's all she let her say. She told me to go back in my bedroom, and I had to go to the bathroom first. She came into the bathroom with her biggest belt that had a huge buckle on it, and she started beating me with this belt, telling me that I was never to hit a woman or a girl. And she beat me so much, she finally hit me in the head, and it knocked me senseless. I fell in between the wall and the commode, and she was just beating me, and I was starting to go in and out of consciousness. And if my big sister had not stepped in and stopped her, she would have beat me to death. I didn't go to school for over 2 weeks because my mother didn't want anyone to see what she had done to me. Those kind of beatings were not atypical. They happened all the time. When I was around probably 9 years old, it was not too long after we'd moved from Mobile. We lived maybe 90 miles going back and forth because there wasn't a straight road to New Orleans at the time. I ran away and went to New Orleans. And I got off at a bus. I took a bus. I went into the bathroom near Jackson Square, and a man came in and was very inappropriate with me and scared me to death. And he pretty much latched on to me and told me, he said, we're going to go here. And there's a man I want you to meet. And it was a child sex trafficking ring. And he said, I want you to wait here while I go inside. And as soon as he went inside, I don't know how many children stayed, but I didn't. I ran. And I went right to the bus station and got a ticket back home. And so that's the first instance that I can remember where God actually interceded to protect me in my life. There are many instances where he did. I finally moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and the things got worse. My mom was divorced by then from my father. We had very little supervision because we were, like latchkey kids. But when she would come home, I'd be, what did Devin do wrong today? I know he did something wrong. Let me go get my belt. And so I started staying away from home as much as possible. I was around 13 when I started taking drugs. The first drug I took was LSD. And then I started shooting up whenever I could get something. That was right at the very end of the hippie movement. And you could take a bus from Ponce de Leon Avenue all the way into Atlanta, and there were people just walking up and down the street saying what they were selling. And it was real cheap, and it was everywhere. So that's what I fell into for comfort. I finally ended up in Galveston, Texas, and I was living on the streets there. And I ran into some Christians down on the beach. They were witnessing, and they said, well, look, they realized that I was a runaway, and they said, why don't you come and stay at our coffee house that we have? It's open 24 hours a day. There's sleeping mats, cushions around the perimeter. We'll make sure you get fed right, and if you need medical care, we'll get it for you. And so we started talking, and they were telling me about the Lord and what he could do in my life, and the concept of it was great, but I had no idea that you could have a personal relationship with God. So it kind of went right over my head. But they had found out that I had signed myself over to the child welfare department in Tucker, Georgia, where I'd lived, and they couldn't find placement for me. So they had sent me to reform school, which was a pretty common practice back then. And that's where I had run from. And I actually walked almost all the way from Augusta, Georgia to Galveston, Texas. The guy that ran away with me, we had a few rides here and there where people would stop, but mostly we walked the whole way. We parted ways in Galveston, and I was living underneath a restaurant that had a pier out onto the water, and it was fenced off, and no trespassing underneath, but that's where I was sleeping. And one night I woke up, and the waves, it was extra high tide, they were breaking over me, and the hole that was underneath the fence, the sand had settled on it, and I almost drowned. Fortunately I got out. That's when I went to the coffee house where the Christians were. And I didn't know it, but they had contacted a foster family, and they decided they took me in. I was around 14. They got a lawyer. The coffee house did, along with the Hans, the people I was staying with. And they contacted Georgia and said, look, we're going to sue you guys for incarceration without due process, because I never went to court or anything. They just sent me there unless you relinquish custodial rights to the state of Texas, and specifically to the foster care system. And so I stayed with them, and they were born again Christians, very active in ministry work, and witnessing and taking people into their home to help them. And I felt like a square peg trying to fit into a triangular block. It was like living with the Cleavers. I was just overwhelmed. I later found out that I had what was called a crash and burn syndrome. I'd always been rewarded negatively for everything I'd done. I'd always been rewarded negatively, whether it was good or bad. I was getting a positive reward, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I ran away. I ended up in Colorado. I got a job at McDonald's. A kind man took me in, and I lived on his couch in Boulder, Colorado, until I saved enough money to where I could leave. And then I took a bicycle that was there that was in disrepair, had been sitting there forever, flat tires, and I stole it and spent quite a bit of money fixing it up. And then I rode from Colorado all the way to Oklahoma City, and eventually ended up back with the Hans, but that didn't work out. I failed 8th grade because I played hooky all the time. So I had to repeat that, and I'd finished 9th grade. So when I went in with the Hans, by the time I got the time that I spent with them, I was in 10th grade, and it just didn't work out. So I decided I was going to try and go back home, and I talked to my mom, and she says, well, okay, But when I got there, it was same old, same old. So I went down and talked to an Army recruiter. I was 17 by that time. And they told me that I would, if I wanted to go in, they'd be willing to take me, but I'd have to get my mother's signature, and she was all too happy to do that. So I went into the service, and I didn't fit in there either, because when I, did what I was told and was doing things right, I was praised. And so I ended up going AWOL, and I was gone for over a year before they finally caught up with me. But I went to Spokane during that year and worked at the World's Fair. The city had set aside a community for homeless people that were coming in, and I stayed there. And I ran into my brother there, of all things, from Atlanta. And we were taking every drug that we could get a hold of. And finally I told him, I said, we got to get out of here, or one of us is going to overdose. We got to get away. So we left. We ended up hitchhiking back down south, and I got into some trouble and ended up spending some time, 5 months in jail. And when I got out, I said, my probation officer told me, he said, I don't have time for you. I don't have time for half the people they have me seeing. So he said, here's what I'm going to do. He said, you move to any other state you want to move to, get travel papers to go there. But he said, it'll take 3 months to 6 months for them to catch up to you. Before they catch up to you, go somewhere else and do the same thing. Just let the people that you go in when you check in that you're leaving. And so that's what I did. So I didn't see a probation officer ever. I went back to Spokane, as I said, and that was in 1975. That's where I met my wife, and we were married. And we've been together almost 48 years now. When I was in Spokane, before I met my wife, in 1974, the Yippies, who were the violent extreme of the hippie movement, decided they were going to jump over the World's Fair fences, take down the American flag, put up the Yippie flag, and smoke or burn a pound of pot. And they let the police know that that's what they were going to do. So when the people who were joining them went and got up to where the World's Fair was, there was a police line there like I've never seen, riot gear, the full, and they didn't care who you were or what you were doing. They were beating you in the head with a billy club and throwing you in a wagon and carting you off to jail. And my brother and I were smart enough to know that that's what was going to happen. So we followed from the rear and went around the block and came up behind the police line. And this one Christian grabbed a hold of me physically on my arm and told me, brother, you need to repent the way you're living your life. You're going to go to hell. And I told him, let go of me. And he wouldn't let go of me. I kept telling him, let go. The police were coming. They were like 3 feet away at this point. And they would have thrown both of us in. They wouldn't have cared who we were. And so I finally told him, I said, look, either you let go of me or I'm going to beat you down. And I would have beat him to a pulp. And so he finally let go of me. And I have to feel that man prayed for me for all these years. Well, after I got married in 1975, I called my mother and I asked her, I said, are you ever going to tell me you love me? And she says, well, you need to settle down. You need to go to school. And you need to get good grades, and you need to find somebody, if you can, to marry. And so I entered into Washington State University, got a GED, and I was carrying about a 3.8 GPA. I was going into nursing, so there was sciences and chemistry, which I had to struggle through. And like I said, I was married, and I called my mother and I said, I'm in school. What kind of grades you making? And I told her, and I said, I'm married now. And she says, well, I got 2 questions for you. Who are you cheating off of? And you're lying to me about being married. No woman would ever want to have anything to do with you. You're unlovable. And so I started seeing somebody, a counselor, because that was hard to deal with. He told me about the crash and burn syndrome. And he also told me that I should let my wife know that when I start doing something which is going to get me into trouble or cause problems, because I was starting to drink very heavily at that time, let her know so that she can point it out to you and you can see it and you can start, putting the brakes on. And that helped, but it was still there. At one point, she actually, before I went into school, she had told me, she says, you have to make a choice. She says, it's either the alcohol or me. It can't be both. And she didn't think I would do it, but I did. That made me examine my life. And so I told her, I said, okay, I'm going to quit drinking. And what really pushed me towards it was one day I had been out partying all night, and I was assistant manager for a seafood restaurant that opened up into a bar. So we were open as soon as the bar was. I woke up and I was about probably an hour late from opening, getting everything ready. And so I didn't have a car, so I was running. It was about maybe a mile and a half. And I was going down this hill, and there was a hillside to the right and a 4-lane road on the left. And I was running down, and there was nobody there. But all of a sudden, this man in a green suit grabbed a hold of me and swung me around. I had such a hangover. And he said, looks to me like you need a little bit of the hair of dog that bit you. And he reaches into his jacket and he pulls out a bottle of 23-year-old scotch, never been opened. And he says, here, have some. And so I belted down a bunch of it. It goes down smooth. After I did that, I handed it back to him and started to run off. But I realized I hadn't thanked him, and I turned around to thank him, and he was nowhere to be seen. And all the way, the rest of the way running there, I thought to myself, man, that guy had to be the devil. And then when my wife confronted me, that was the deciding factor, that I was over the line and that it was severely impacting my life, because when I got drunk, I was an angry drunk. And so we went to a dry county in the middle of the desert, and we worked on a cattle ranch there. When we finally we both got into school. She graduated with a degree in animal science and got a job down here working. And so I came down with her and our family, my son. She had a very secure job. At that point in time, I started having problems with my back. I found out that I had broken my back at some point in my life. And I fell in the woods in Idaho and hurt myself. And then I also fell 3 or 4 times in this kitchen where I worked at a high-end Mexican restaurant. And because the floor was so slippery in there. And I found out that the back injury that I had was from a previous time, but the falls had probably what set it off. And I ended up having a first surgery of 10 surgeries on my spine. It was a while, probably maybe 4 years after we moved to Tennessee. I came up with this philosophy, and I knew it was bunk, but I knew that if I spread it by word of mouth, that people are pretty much dumb enough to believe it. And so I called it the philosophy of me. And I said, I am me. I created me. I put me in charge of me. I love me and I support me, and I won't do anything that will harm me. So I'm me. And at that point in time, God took offense with that. And I was sitting in my chair smoking a joint one day, and I heard this voice in my head. It said, "You're not alone. You're not me. I am." God was telling me that. I was like, yeah, give me a break. Because he pretty much told me I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am Jesus Christ. And I then became a struggle, whether I was awake or whether I was asleep. This battle was going on in my mind. And I hated Christians so much. My idea of hell was spending the rest of my life in heaven with a bunch of Jesus freaks. That's how I was so angry. And by the time the third day rolled around, he said to me, the Holy Spirit did, today is the day of salvation. I'd never read this. I didn't know this. And he says, I have chosen you to be one of my children. And I got so angry. I was furious. How dare he pick then, when I was starting to get a little bit of peace in my life and a little bit of comfort, to tell me that he loved me. I mean, where was he when I was suffering under my mother? I was so angry. And he said, I was there. You never called on me. People have free choice. And because of that, people make bad decisions. And unfortunately, you suffered because of it. And he says, my heart has always been broken for you. He said, I've been sending my children to you for over 20 years, and you have chased them all away. You've chased them. So that's why I'm here with you one-on-one. And I'm asking you, because today is the day of salvation, to accept my son into your life. And he said, you've got two decisions, yes or no. But if you choose no, I want to let you know I will never ask you again. Man, the strength just went out of me. I fell down on my hands and knees. I couldn't stand anymore. And I said, what do I do? I have no idea what to do. And he says, that's all right. I do. And the Holy Spirit led me in the prayer of salvation to agree to turn my life over to him, to accept his son into my life and allow him to become the warrior, the young warrior that I was born to be. He led me in the repentance prayer and I was saved. And for the first time in my life, I literally felt like scales fell off of my eyes. And I could see for the first time what a wretched person I was. How terrible I'd been to my wife. How terrible of a father I'd been. But then that burden was lifted away from me, and I felt like I had 100 pounds taken off of my shoulders. And my life, I was just filled with joy because I knew that even though I would still have to suffer the consequences of what I'd done in this life here in this world, that I would not have to suffer the consequences for them forever. I started reading the Bible, and during those 3 days, I read Revelation on the third day, the whole book in one day, out of the King James Version, no less. And it scared me because I've always had a little bit of the prophetic in me. I'm not a prophet, but I can see things happen sometimes before they do. And I can see the way the things are going on in the world around me. And so when I saw what was happening in Revelation, I could see those fruits starting to ripen in the world. This was back in 96. I got to the end of the book in chapter 21, verse 4, where it says, This is after the great white throne judgment in chapter 20, where it says that there'll be no more pain, there'll be no more death, there'll be no more sorrow, for all these things are passed away. And when I got to the pain and the sorrow part, that really spoke to me, because out of the pain that I've caused that hangs around my neck like an anvil sometimes, and the pain, physical pain that I suffer because of the chronic pain that I'm in. I have a deformed spine, and like I said, I've had 10 back surgeries, and I'm getting ready to go through another surgery. That really speaks to me. And I have a mentor who tells me, you know, Evan, when you get to heaven, you're going to have a new body. You know, so the other night, I've got a herniated disc in my neck, and it affects my whole body, and it's so painful. I live in agony. And I was hurt so bad, and I just remembered where God said, give joy in all things. And so I just raised my hands in praise to God, and I said, I thank you. I thank you that I'm alive. I thank you that you've done all this in my life. And I know that this pain is for a reason, that you can use it for your glory. And the next day I woke up, and it had not gone away, but it was so much better. It still comes and goes. But I was here a few Wednesdays ago. We're in the process of changing churches. And I went up front for prayer and asked for prayer for my back. And I was hunched over really bad because I was hurting so bad. And the pastor prayed for me that I would walk and stand up straight. And since that prayer, from the moment I left the front of the church to go back to my seat, I've been standing straight. I still suffer with the pain, but I know there are a lot of people who probably suffer with chronic pain. And I would say to them, it's a tough road to handle, especially back pain, but any kind of chronic pain is terrible. But take that pain to God. Take that pain to Yeshua, Jesus Christ, our Messiah, our Savior, because he understands and he can give us comfort in that pain. Fell away for a while. I wouldn't say that I was backslid. I just wasn't where God wanted me to be. I wasn't attending church. I'd been a custodian in my church for 5 years. I was there all the time, more than just on Sundays. You know, I had to be there for all the events to open up and close. And so I was surrounded by churchology and was even very much into it. But it was a charismatic movement that there were things happening in it that I just did not feel comfortable with. And so she didn't either, my wife. So we stopped going. And when you don't fellowship, you get selected out. And that's when the devil can really, really minister. I wasn't where I needed to be, but a couple of months ago, I asked God, we have a study that we do virtual, and on Thursdays. And my mentor who does the teachings, he's in his 80s. He's the kind of person who'll ask you, how are you doing in the Lord? You know, tell me what God's doing in your life. And he's very subtle about it, because if someone's backslid, it can push them even further away. So I really started thinking about it, and I knew that I was not in the place where God wanted me to be. So I asked him to give me a spirit of brokenness. And if you're not ready to be broken, you don't ask for it, because everything that could go wrong went wrong. I was out working in my garden. I tripped over a log bed that I have. I fell. That's probably when I herniated the disc in my neck. Just everything started going haywire. But at the same time, I was not only asking for a spirit of brokenness, I was asking for the Lord to renew the joy of my salvation. Because I was so craving for God to be where I hadn't let him be. And that joy started coming back. And it used to be like, okay, I got to read 3 chapters today. Now, it's hard to stop at 3 chapters. And I've got Bible commentaries, Vine's dictionary, lexicons, Old and New Testament. I'll have 3 or 4 translations laid out in front of me because I want to get what's being said. And I just got done with Hebrews, where it says, don't let what you received in the beginning slip away. Because if you do, you might not be able to get it back. And God has impressed on me, there is probably going to be more to come in the brokenness department. But you've got my joy now. You've got my hunger and thirst for what's truly right and good in your life and what will most benefit your family. And patience is something that I really need because, like I said, there was so much anger and so much pain, not just spiritually, but physically in my life. And the pain's still there, the physical pain, but it means nothing when eternity stands awaiting and God's saying, I want you to enter into my rest. After I made the earth, I entered into my rest and I've been there ever since. And I want you to be with me. And I was just crying the other night. I don't know why God chose me. I'm so unworthy. I've done some terrible things in my life. When you live on the streets as a kid, you steal, you lie, you cheat, you do anything that you have to do to survive. It's not a pretty life. And drugs, they take you down the wrong road. All they can do is fulfill you while they are in you. And then you have to do them some more. It becomes a religion. That's what your faith is in. And that faith takes you right down into the very pits of hell while you're alive. Can't imagine what it's going to be like when you die. Some of the Jesus freaks that used to walk around with the 8-track ghetto blasters back during the Jesus movement, they used to say, well, hey, you can get high on the Lord. And I guess that's part of what came into the charismatic movement. And it's not about, I found out it's not about me going to church to get filled and to get something for me. It's about going to church to be discipled. It's about going to be with other disciples. And if the Spirit comes in and fills you while you're doing that, that is evidence of a Spirit, Christ, God-filled life. But that you shouldn't have to go to church to have those things in your life, but it sure helps. So I just told my wife the other day, I said, you got to face it. You're dealing with a born-again Jesus freak. That's where I am now. And I said, if we're not on the same page as far as, yeah, let's go get it for Jesus. Let's witness the people we run into. I've ordered Bible tracts, both in Spanish and in American, because we have a lot of Spanish people now. And pocket Bibles, both in Spanish and American. And to pass them out, and also pass out a U.S. Constitution, because It says in there, the First Amendment, that our rights pretty much are established by God. And I would like to see, every nation is under God. That's the shirt that I have on. One nation under God. All nations are. Not all nations follow God. And we've lost our direction. And so I want people to know that it's through the gospel. And I consider the whole Bible the gospel, even though we're not under the old covenant anymore. We're under the new. Hebrews, if you read it in the New Living Translation or Amplified Bible, it really lays out what it means, the old covenant, and why they did the things the ritual ways they did them, and why that doesn't work anymore, and why the chief priests hated Jesus so much, because he was there to put them out of a job or to transfer them into a new one. But he knew. It says in Isaiah pretty much what it says in Revelation, about no more sorrow. But it also says that he was born to be almighty, wonderful counselor. And he came from the line of Melchizedek, who had no parents, was never born, and was chief priest. And Christ came from his lineage came from the tribe of Judah, which had never been under Levites or who were the priests, because he wanted us to know that his priesthood came from God, not man, not from the law of Moses, but from the law of God. He even said, you can wrap up all the commandments into two. Love me with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. Be dedicated to me. And then love your neighbor as yourself. And if you look it up, it says your neighbor is whoever you come into contact with. And it also says that if you have it within your power to do good and you don't do it, it is a sin to you. And that's all part of the love your neighbor as yourself. Because I'm not into this, if you give give this to the church or send this to me, I'll send you some more, that God will give you more because you can never outgive God. That's not where God wants you to be. Because when you do that, when you give that money in that, you're either being used or you're being taken advantage of. And that's not why God wants you to give. He wants you to give to those that he wants you to give to. So my testimony isn't just about all these bad things that I went through. Those were just stepping stones for me to see that young warrior with a hard head had to be beaten in the head all those years by God and the people he sent to me, so that I would know that they were an example of what did not work. And I don't know who you are in the world, but I do know that we're all made in the image of God, and that he knows everything that we go through, all the thoughts, everything we see and put into our heads, whether it be through TV or books or any kind of things that are evil. And sexual sin is something the devil's been using in the world since early on. He's got it down pat. He knows everything that can trip up a person, even people that are born again. He knows how to trip them up. But we need the living God inside of us, because he is the only one who can deliver us from the separation that man went through by going from a perfect place where they actually walked in the very presence of God. Even though they were with him, they didn't see him. They were innocent, but they didn't see. And that verse says, no man has ever seen God at any time. That's what it's getting at. We don't have the mind of God. We don't know his thought processes. We don't know what he sees in the future. We don't know what he saw in the past. except for everything. So I don't serve God out of guilt. I serve God out of a deep-seated craving that I want everything that's within me to be gone so that I can receive everything that he wants from me, no matter what the cost. I mean, I've been through some bad times. I've been shot at hitchhiking. We were in George Washington one time, which is basically a gas station that's closed almost all the time, and a cafe which is open just a little bit more. And it was snowing. There was a blizzard. We had come from Seattle. We were staying in a commune there, and so we were dressed lightly, and it was below zero. And the snow was coming down so hard you could barely see across the overpass where we were standing up at the exit, because you can't hitchhike on the freeways there. And my tennis shoes were starting to ice over. My feet were getting cold. And I told my wife, here's where we're going to die. And the nearest house in any going that way back towards Wenatchee was about 3.5 miles. And the nearest one going the other one was a lot further. It's in the desert. And across this other bridge, not too far down, it goes over the Snake River, or Columbia River. It was too far to walk. And we would have been arrested because it was on the freeway. So out of the snow walks this hippie. Long hair, blue jean jacket, no hat, no gloves. And he comes up and he says, why don't you let me take you over here in this cafe and buy you something hot to eat and a hot beverage? And I thought the place was closed. But when we got there, it was open. And we went in and we ordered what we wanted. He said, get what you want. He ordered nothing. I noticed his nose wasn't red, like it gets in the cold. There was no snow on him. He was dry. We were soaked. And so we made small talk. He didn't say very much, really. But he did. He reached up and he pulled up his blue jean jacket and he looked at his watch and he says, you guys need to finish up. It's time to leave. Your ride is going to be here in a few minutes. And so we walked back out to the exit, and he gave us a hug, and he walked back out into the snow and disappeared. And as soon as he did, this van pulled up, sliding sideways, because the roads were so slick and the snow was knee-deep. And he looked at his map, and then he came over and he opened up the doors and he's rubbing his eyes and he says, I'm kind of snowblind here from driving in this blizzard. He says, I thought I was seeing a mirage. He said, you guys are real. I said, what are you doing out here? He said, you should get in here. You're going to freeze to death. And I told my wife, I said, that guy had to be an angel. So even before I was saved, God protected me and sent his servants to watch after not only myself, but my family through these years. And God knows there's things that I have done in my married life in the 48 years that if I could go back and undo them, I would. I was not a good husband. I was not a good father. I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't pass on the love that I could have. I didn't beat my son. I respected that. But I didn't know how to love and support him the way he needed to be loved and supported. And I didn't love and support my wife the way she needed to be loved and supported. It was more about, what can I do to make me happy? And that's when I came up with that stupid philosophy of me. And I think that's when God finally decided, I'm going to knock that chip off your shoulder. And you're going to find out real quick who's me. And he was gentle about it. But after I got saved, boy, I thought things were, But things got terrible. I didn't know it, but my wife had been praying for me to get saved. The people in the trailer court next to us, they called us the demons of the trailer court. And they had been praying for us every week at their Bible studies. So I'm just really happy that God helped. You know, he had people watching out. I know where I'm going from here. I don't have to say, well, I don't know what's going to happen from here. That's not what's important. What's important is to keep myself firmly rooted. I put on the breastplate of righteousness and the belt of truth, and the helmet of salvation. I take up the shield of faith. I take up the sword of the Spirit. And most of all, I have my feet outfitted with the gospel of salvation, so that I can go out as the young warrior that Christ has called me to be. I think it's so important. And in this day and age when evil is creeping in and casting its shadow over our country, people need to hear the good news, because they sure aren't getting it from our government. There are saved people who are unafraid to speak out. But from the top down, we need to pray for our people in authority, because they need the same salvation that's available to everybody else. And so I would say to you who are hearing this, that God's not a plastic God that you stick on your dashboard in your car. He's not a picture that you hang up on your wall. He's someone who has a book that if you just take the time to read it, it has the ability to feed your soul for what you are missing in your life. And it will give you the words how you can come into contact with God. Because it says in Revelation 21 that after all this system is done over with, that he is going to be in our presence, that we will have access to him, and he will be our God. There won't be any night, because he's a spirit of such pure light that it obliterates darkness. So there won't be any more candle under the basket or candle on top of the basket to shine your light out to people, because it'll be there and there won't be any more evil. It says in the Old Testament that the memory of this world will be gone. The burden of what we ourselves were before Christ will be gone. And since we have, if you elect to ask Christ into your life, that burden, once we stand in the presence of God, after this system is over with, on the last day when the trumpet is sounded and we are changed in a twinkling of an eye to be with him in the clouds, heaven, not the earthly sky or outer space, but actual heaven. We'll be there forever. We will be like the angels, in that we'll be in where there's no temptation. There's no burden of the past hanging around our necks. All we have to look forward to is forever in God's mercy. And so I would say that if you haven't accepted Christ, or you've been thinking about it, or you've been angry, or you hate God, just realize that you can't do battle with God. God's God. You're not. I'm not. He would rather give you mercy than have you go through the pain of being separated from him. He says, I'm long suffering, and man has free will. And so that's why the world is so bad. That's why evil things happen. But he is waiting. He's waiting for you. He wants you. He wants to heal you. He wants to give you the freedom. It says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And it's talking about liberty of the mind. He can set your mind free. And he wants to set your mind free. You may have mental problems that you have to take medications for. That's okay. But no matter what you're going through, like I say, I go through chronic pain. I suffer tremendously every day. My wife suffers because she has to watch me suffer and she can't do anything about it. But this suffering is nothing compared to what God has prepared for me. No ear has heard, no eye has seen what God has prepared for us. And so I would just say, please, if you hear in your mind or someone comes to you with a Bible tract or wants to sit down and ask you if you've thought about heaven and what eternity is like, that you would really take it into your heart to do that, because he has the ability. He is the only one who can do that. There are no other gods. They are made up. They don't have the power to set you free. They may give you some joy for a season, but I'm a living example of what Christ can do. And it just touches me so much in my heart. And he chose me. I don't know why. But I love him. And I give him praise, and I give him glory, and I give him honor. And that's the only God I'm going to do that with. And anything that he wants to take out of me that doesn't need to be there, I'm willing to let him have it. My mentor says that's stinking thinking when you start delving into the wrong thing. He says you need to get your ducks in a row. And the way to do that is to press in to the heart of Jesus. Well, for physical release from this pain that I'm in, and then if I need to go under the knife, which they're saying I'm probably going to have to, that everything go okay. But my main thing is that I stay thirsty for the water of life, for the gift that Christ has renewed in me, the joy of my salvation. I don't want to lose it. I know that there'll come dry times and times of temptation, but if I am rooted in his word and have a healthy, active prayer life and stay in fellowship and take charge of the spiritual headship that I've been given for my household and for anybody that he sees to put under me for mentoring or discipleship, that I'm able and willing to make sure that I do it as he would have me do it.